Here it is, the Intel Core i5 Frost White PC build. I'm really excited to be building this today. We're going for a white theme all over on this build with Argb fans, and we've also got the new H570 motherboard going in this and a dual panel tempered glass micro ATX case. Now if you're new to the channel, subscribe to see more PC builds like this, and if you enjoy the video, give us a thumbs up and ring the bell icon to be notified of more upcoming videos. Now let's get on with the build. For the motherboard, we've got the brand new Asrock H570M Pro 4. Now in the box we find our manual, our driver's disc, two SATA cables, our I/O shield, and lastly 2 NVMe screws. Taking the motherboard out of the anti-static bag, we get to see the new motherboard. The board features an 8-phase power design to help with stability. 2 M.2 slots, with one of them having a heat spreader on, and the motherboard supports socket 1200, 11th gen and 10th gen Intel CPUs. We've also got 4 DDR4 slots supporting up to 128 gigs and 4800 MHz overclock. On the right we see one of our USB 3 headers for I/O, and next to that we have the USB Type-C header which we'll be using for this build. We'll turn the motherboard around so we can see what's on top. For CPU power, we have a 8-pin and an additional 4-pin for extreme overclocking and power draw. It is a really packed motherboard with lots of features, which is nice to see. On the back, it's pretty standard. You've got your onboard graphics connections, 6 USB 3 ports, Ethernet, and 7.1 channel Realtek Nahimic audio. For the CPU, we are using again the Intel Core i5-10400F. These are fantastic budget CPUs with no compromise on performance. We use this CPU for another PC build, which feel free to check out, and the link will be at the top right now. These boast 6 cores, 12 threads and a base speed of 2.9 GHz with a boost to 4.3. In the box we've got our CPU of course, information booklet with our Intel sticker, and alongside that we have our materials declaration sheet. And lastly, we've got our stock fan, which we will not be using for this build. Let's start with installing the Intel CPU. We're going to pull up the retention lever to open the socket, grab our CPU and make sure it lines up with the notches. And once that's done, we will close up the socket and the plastic protective cover should just pop off. We've got to be careful as Intel sockets are delicate as the pins are fragile. Now that we've got the CPU installed, let's start with preparing the NVMe SSD. There's 2 screws holding the heat spreader down, so we will need to remove them in order to get to the slot for install. For the SSD, we have got a Seagate Barracuda Q5 500GB NVMe. Nothing exciting in the packaging, just a plastic holder for the SSD. These are good quality SSDs for everyday use with better speeds than an average SATA SSD. We will remove the film in order for the thermal pad to make contact with the NVMe drive. It has got a bit of weight, which is nice to see, and we will lower it down and screw it back up, and then we are done with the motherboard for the moment. 1 screw in there and the other one there. Another thing that's good with the Asrock board is that it supports 2 NVMe slots, so an extra one can be added later on. And that's the motherboard all done with. We're going to move on to the case now. We have got the Ionz KZ17 micro ATX case. This case has a USB Type-C connector, 1 USB 3 header and 2 USB 2 headers. We've also got headphone and microphone, and lastly our power button. The KZ17 is rather a unique case for under £40. It has 2 tempered glass side panels, one for the left and one for the right. ATX PSU support at the front, with an extension kettle cable coming out to the back. And it's also going to be a difficult job cabling the other side, as this case does not have cable tie cutouts, so we're going to have to improvise in order to do a tidy job on this, as it will be on show. This case has an all metal and no plastic parts, which makes it also quite heavy for its size. There are mixed reviews on this case on Amazon for one certain thing, and that is the cutout for the I/O shield and the motherboard, and they are misaligned slightly. I can confirm that this was also the case with this when we built it. However, it was not so bad, and the motherboard's HDMI was the only port that sunk below the cutout. However, I cannot guarantee that it would be the same for everyone. It is a fantastic showcase, but with certain flaws. But if that does not bother you, go for it, because without that issue, this case is worth far more than what it is being sold for, and it's also got a USB Type-C port as well. So as you can see, we've just had to install some cable ties early on, as the motherboard will be going on top of this and we can't do it after. We're just removing the radiator and the PSU bracket, as these get mounted onto the case with these two hardware pieces. For the power supply, we have got the new Corsair CX750F Argb. This is perfect for the build because, of course, it's white, the cables are white, and it's got an Argb fan, which is all perfect as it is going to be on show. The unit has an 80+ bronze efficiency, however in the UK on Cybernetics website it scores gold in efficiency on 230 volts, and in the US it scores silver. Let's start with what's in the box. We've got our UK kettle cable, cable ties and screws, a bag of white modular cables, a big chunky manual, an information booklet, which leaves us lastly with the power supply. It is padded well with foam and smells like new hardware. Let's just get it out of the bag. It has got weight, which is at least a good thing for a power supply. Also, we have an RGB button on the back, if ARGB is not an option. I must say that it is a shame with certain builds, as power supplies that look great are closed away and can't be seen, but with this build, the power supply gets the chance to be seen in full. On the amps label, we've got a generous 62.5 amps on the 12 volt rail, which is plenty for this build and leaves room for upgradability in the future. Underneath, we have our honeycomb grille and our fan with the Corsair logo in the middle. Let's prepare the power supply for install. We're going to grab the case PSU bracket and install 4 screws to mount it on. The bracket gets installed onto the PSU like the same way a power supply gets installed in a traditional case, but the bracket has mount holes for the case for the PSU to go onto, which leaves us with one more bracket to do, which is the water cooler. For the AIO, we have got the Vetroo 240mm Lurker liquid CPU cooler. This is what's going to keep our CPU cool and whilst looking great at the same time. The Lurker uses PTFE materials for the pipes, which give it a nice look and doesn't look cheap. This AIO has also got excellent reviews and is highly rated. I never heard of the make before, but glad that I got the opportunity to, because I would definitely use this again for another build. In the box we have two 120mm ARGB fans, our instruction manual, which is all in English, mounting screws for AMD and Intel, and lastly the liquid cooler itself. All of it is white, including the cables, which is nice to see. The pump is also ARGB, and is that a refill on the radiator? That's not common to see on closed loop AIOs, but handy later on in years if it needs to be flushed and refilled. We'll just remove the bag from the radiator. We've got 8 screws to mount this onto the case bracket, and we will have 8 long screws to mount the ARGB fans onto the radiator. There was a toss between getting this and the ID Cooling 240mm AIO. However, in my opinion, this looks better and also has ARGB. And also the fans that we've got also match with the fans on the radiator. With that out of the way, we have got our modular cables to install onto the PSU for this build. We will require the ARGB cable, one 8-pin CPU power connector, a 24-pin motherboard cable, two 8-pin PCIe power cables, and a SATA power cable for the ARGB splitter. We're going to lay the case back down and install the 3 ARGB fans, which are the same make as the AIO and use the same fans. There's nothing exciting in the boxes, just a fan and 4 screws with each one in a box. Two of these fans will get installed at the bottom of the case, pulling air onto the GPU, with all else fans pushing air out. The bottom fans require 8 screws to hold them on. The last fan will go on the back of the case, held onto another 4 screws. Now with the fans installed, it's time to install the I/O shield. It's not actually that bad to install on this case and doesn't require a lot of fuddy-duddy compared to other cases where once you install it on one side, it pops out the other side, vice versa. We've got to turn around the case and pull all the PSU cables before we screw it in because it is a tight squeeze. All these will be fed directly below it in order to keep it as tidy as possible, and once they are done, we'll lay back down the case and mount the PSU bracket onto the chassis. It's held on by 2 small screws and a Phillips screw at the bottom. Before we install the motherboard into the chassis, we're going to install the pump bracket first, as stupidly the case cutout does not match the 4 holes, which is disappointing, but not a problem as we noticed that before we started screwing it in. We will lower the motherboard into the case and line it up with the I/O shield. We'll put in 8 screws to hold it into place. Overall, I must say that this build is coming along nicely and I'm really looking forward to seeing what the final result looks like. The radiator gets mounted at the top of the case and is also screwed onto the chassis with 2 small screws and 1 Phillips screw. It is a bit of a tight squeeze, but this build is designed to be compact and also look amazing at the same time. The 2 Argb fans will be installed underneath, exhausting heat from the top of the case. These will get installed with 8 long screws, and we will feed the cables via the CPU power cutout, which is just underneath it. The pub will get screwed in with 4 thumb screws, which was a pain as the CPU bracket's sticky side on the back wasn't liking the pressure applied. We will also tighten them with a screwdriver just to make sure enough pressure is applied evenly whilst not overdoing it. We also had to install the pump with the logo upside down as the hoses were under stress, and that may cause big problems later on with the logo the right way. In my opinion, because it's a simple logo, it still suits well the way it is and doesn't look weird. This is what the PC looks like so far, and it looks great. I've done cable management on the other side, and it is as good as it gets with no proper cable management cutouts. There is a lot of Argb connections, and it is as tidy as it can be, which still looks good. For the RAM, we've got the ADATA Spectrix D60G 16GB kit, and it's also Argb, which will look great with everything else. These will go on the motherboard in DIMM slot 2 and DIMM slot 4. Lastly, for the graphics card, we have got the MSI GTX 1070 8GB overclocked graphics card, which is plenty for 1080p gaming and also 2K. The fans at the bottom will help with cooling the GPU, and the fans at the top will help with pushing hot air from the CPU, and the back case fan will help with pushing warm air out that's inside the case. So it's all configured well. So here it is, the all-white PC build, Everything is plugged in, ready to go, and let's see what this machine looks like. Stunning, I must say. All the Argb is working correctly and all synced, and I'm loving the PSU mount position with also the Argb on show. So here is some footage of the final result of the PC build that we recorded. Thank you very much for watching the i5 white PC build. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to see more videos and to support us, and comment on what you think of this build. Till then, we'll see you in the next one. Oh, and the Intel sticker. Ta-da!